Hello everybody, we are going to be playing Affinity today. This is for the new series that is yet to be named, but it's either going to be moving into Modern or... what was the other one? What we were talking about Twitch? I forget. You guys will remind me. In any event, today we are playing Affinity. Affinity is known for its quote-unquote... the mechanic isn't even used that much. The mechanic is called Affinity for artifacts, and none of the creatures really have that on here. That said, they benefit from having a bunch of artifacts in the battlefield at the same time. So something like, we can talk about the land package here. We have things like Mox Opal, for example, as Metalcraft. It adds 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, but you can only activate it if you have 3 or more artifacts. And then you have Springleaf Drum, which basically turns all your creatures into mana producers. Then you have cards like Steel Overseer, which, 2 mana 1/1, but it taps to give a +1/+1 counter to each artifact you control. And you have all these incredibly cheap creatures that are like pretty unassuming and kind of not great. Like Memnite is a 0 mana 1/1, but when you pair these two together, then you like really start piecing together a good attack. Signal Pest is very good for that too, as Battle Cry. It's basically unblockable. It can only be blocked with creatures with flying or reach. So when it attacks, it beefs up your other little creatures. You have 4 Ornithopters, 0/2s, but get the beef from Steel Overseers and Signal Pests. And then one of the most important cards of the deck is Arcbound Ravager. Arcbound Ravager has modular, and you can sack an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So basically, he's really good against removal, right? They try to kill it, you can just like move the modular counters around. You can also set up some lines where you can go for kills on the unblocked creature. You gotta be a little bit careful that you don't get blown out, because you could, but it's a tough card to play against, and it's a centerpiece of the deck. Perhaps the most important card in the deck is Cranial Plating. 2 mana, equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control, and as you can see, all your artifacts cost basically 0. So like the biggest thing that this deck does is it goes on turn 1, it just goes like, here go all my cards. Dragon Mage, actually, that's a funny thing we will talk about. Gaby's refusal to play Court is a reflection of her true feelings towards Squirrel. I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch, but we will play Court at some point. Like I said, I don't know if I'll do it on stream. This version is playing Master of Ethereum. This is a stock list online. There's nothing too special about it. Not all the deck lists play Master of Ethereum, but some do, especially the ones that are trying to play more blue. Master of Ethereum's power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts you control. So he's also an artifact lord. All your other artifact creatures get +1/+1. So he's a big threat when he's out, and he also makes your Memnites, your Ornithopters, your Signal Pests, and your Vault Scourges a little bit better. Edge Champion is great against decks that are playing spot removal and things like that. He has protection from colors, all colors, so pretty bad against Eldrazi. And then lastly, you have Thoughtcast. This is the only card that I think has a mechanic Affinity for artifacts in the whole deck, but it costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. So that's kind of the deck. It's a very synergy-based deck. It kind of needs a lot of pieces for it to function. You get all these hands with Affinity where it's like you have 3 Memnites and 2 Ornithopters and a Springleaf Drum, and it's like that hand does just nothing. But if you ever draw something like an Arcbound Ravager or Cranial Plating, you're kind of in business. We need Ethan Brown here. Yeah, he's very good with it. Lastly, just take a look at our land package. We have Blinkmoth Nexus, which is awesome because it's a colorless land, and most of your spells are colorless. But it also turns into a 1/1 Blinkmoth artifact creature with flying until the end of turn, so that synergizes really well with things like Steel Overseer, because you can put the counters on the Blinkmoth Nexus, and even when it's still a land, it continues to hold the counters. Same with Inkmoth Nexus. Inkmoth Nexus is even better in that sense, because a lot of times you get into these situations with Affinity where you can't win with regular damage, but you might be able to win with Infect. So sometimes you'll have to take a diverging path and say like, hey, I cannot win via regular damage, but I can probably win via Infect. So Inkmoth Nexus and the Cranial Plating can kill your opponent in 1 or 2 turns very quickly. Glimmer Void is great. It's a way to get colors in this deck, even though we don't play that many. We can potentially need them for Thoughtcast, Master of Ethereum, and some of our sideboard cards. So Glimmer Void is a way for us to get that color. Seagate Wreckage is a new inclusion since the last time I've played Affinity, but since you do basically empty out your hand very easily, Sea Gear Wreckage lets you refill in some ways, and you have one basic island for basically every deck that's going to path you, and you're just going to get one island from it. So that is a quick primer on Affinity. This deck is very powerful. It's been tier 1 for a very long time. This one's not playing any Galvanic Blasts in the main deck cap all. It's just playing the Thoughtcasts and more Master of Ethereums. Some decks will play more Burn in the main deck. They'll play Galvanic Blast. This one's also playing one Welding Jar in the main deck, which is just an interesting way to protect some of your more important creatures, like your Steel Overseers. Thank you, Jackson. Potentially your Master of Ethereums. Even your Ink Moth Nexus if you're like trying to go through for the Infect win. We'll talk about that. Yeah, sure, Flip. Taking a look at the sideboard real quick. We have a couple of things. We have, as you notice, a lot of colors, so that is a reason for us to have things like Glimmer Void and even Springleaf Drums, because we do have all these colored cards in the sideboard. Rest in Peace is good against any graveyard deck. It gets things like a Living End. It gets things like Dredge. Dispatch is awesome removal spell, but you need to have Metalcraft, so you need to have 3 or more artifacts, exile that creature. You can otherwise tap it if you don't have Metalcraft, so in a deck that's playing all artifacts, it's a pretty good removal spell. Stubborn Denial against any non-creature spells that you care about. There's a lot of cards that really hose Affinity. Rest in Peace, sorry, not Rest in Peace, what am I talking about? Stony Silence is one of them. Pyroclasm can really get you too. Thank you, Zut. You can also get gotten by Shatterstorm and things like that, so Stubborn Denial, pretty good. Blood Moon randomly hoses a lot of decks in the format. Blood Moon's just a common card if you can play it in your sideboard. Whip Flare is a good board wipe, and it doesn't deal your creatures any damage, so you can bring it against things like elves and decks playing small creatures. Ancient Grudge, great against the Mirror. You have a couple more Edge Champions in the sideboard, awesome against decks that are trying to like snipe your creatures down, so you just bring Edge Champion, and then you have a 2/2 unblockable that you can eventually put more counters via Arcbound Ravager or potentially Cranial Plating, and then they can't do anything with it. A Spellskite and a Grafdigger's Cage. Grafdigger's Cage also good against decks that are trying to either cheat creatures via the library, play Collected Companies, Chords of Calling, sneak cards out of the graveyard, things like Through the Breach, sorry, not Through the Breach, Goryo's Vengeance, things like that. Thank you, Doctor. Whip Flare, yeah. Hi, future self. I'll see you whenever this posts. Alright, so that is just a quick primer on Affinity. We're going to take Affinity to a league now and see how it goes. Like I said, I have not played this deck a ton. I have played it a very small amount. The whole point of the series here is to kind of give you a taste of what does this deck play like, what are its matchups like, what are some of the common mistakes that you can make while playing this deck, and maybe give you a better idea if this is something you want to potentially buy into, or even just proxy up and play with your friends, and so you get a better sense of how the deck plays out. So, cool. We'll see you in the gameplay.